He was 18 years old, the day he learned he was supposed to be a king, and the day he learned his kingdom had been sold for parts. This is the story of what happens when the only thing you've ever been promised is a ghost, and you decide to hunt it down. If you've ever felt like your future was stolen before you even had a chance to claim it, then stick around. This one's for you. And if you believe in second chances, maybe hit that subscribe button, because that's what we talk about here. The long, hard road to finding them. The air in the administrative office of the St. Jude's Home for Boys tasted like stale paper and regret. It was the same air I'd been breathing for 12 years, but on my 18th birthday, it felt thinner, harder to draw into my lungs. Mrs. Gable, the director, sat behind her battleship gray desk, her face a careful mask of professional sympathy. She'd seen hundreds of boys sit where I was sitting, on the cracked vinyl chair that always squeaked when you shifted your weight. She pushed a cardboard box across the desk. It was sealed with yellowing tape. "This is it, Leo," she said, her voice flat. "Your personal effects. Everything your grandfather left in our care." I stared at the box. It wasn't very big. A life, or the remainder of one, shouldn't be able to fit in a box that small. My grandfather was a phantom, a name in a file. He'd died when I was 6, a year after my parents had died in a car crash on a slick winter road. He'd been my guardian for that 1 year, a year I could only remember in flashes of scent and sound, pine needles, sawdust, the low rumble of his voice reading stories I can no longer name. Then he was gone, and I was here. "There's also the final disbursement from your trust," she continued, sliding a thin envelope next to the box. "It's not much. $3,412, enough for a deposit on a small apartment, first month's rent if you're careful." I nodded, my throat tight. Careful was my default setting. At St. Jude's, you learned to be careful with your words, careful with your space, careful with your hopes. Hopes were the most dangerous thing you could have. "And the property?" I asked, the words feeling foreign and clumsy on my tongue. It was the one story I'd clung to, the one piece of impossible glittering hope I'd allowed myself. A story pieced together from overheard whispers and one vague, years-old conversation with a social worker who had a soft spot for me. My grandfather, she'd said, had land. A lot of it. Up north. He'd left it for me. Mrs. Gable's professional mask tightened. She sighed, a small, weary sound. "Leo, we've been over this. The estate was complicated." "Complicated how?" She folded her hands on the desk, her knuckles white. "Your grandfather's sister, your great-aunt, became the executor of his will. You were a minor. She managed the estate on your behalf." She paused, and in that pause, I felt the floor drop out from under me. The land was sold 10 years ago to pay off outstanding debts and taxes. There was nothing left. The words didn't crash into me. They seeped in, cold and slow, like water into a cracked foundation. Sold. 10 years ago. The kingdom I'd secretly built in my mind, a place of vast green fields and towering trees, a place where I wasn't an orphan, a ward of the state, but a person with a history, with roots, vanished. It had never been real. It was just a story I'd told myself in the dark. My aunt? I barely knew her. A woman named Carol who sent a $20 check in a generic Christmas card every year, the signature a spiky, illegible scrawl. "Yes, it was all perfectly legal," Mrs. Gable added, a little too quickly. "She was your closest living relative, the appointed trustee. She made the decisions she felt were best." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The air was too thin. I reached for the box and the envelope, my movements stiff and robotic. The cardboard was cool and smooth under my fingers. My inheritance, a box of memories I couldn't remember, and enough money to be homeless in a month if I wasn't careful. "Leo," she said, her voice softening for the first time, You're a good kid. You're smart. You'll be okay. This is a new start for you." I looked at her, and for a second, I think she saw it, the hollow space behind my eyes. I wasn't a good kid. I wasn't a bad kid. I was a kid who had just been handed the ashes of a dream he didn't even know he'd been allowed to have. A new start felt like being pushed off a cliff and told to enjoy the view on the way down. I stood up, the chair giving one last pathetic squeak. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable." The words were automatic, a product of 12 years of enforced politeness. I walked out of her office, down the long, echoing hallway, polished to a sterile sheen, past the rows of identical doors behind which other boys were living their own quiet, careful lives. I didn't look back. Outside, the world was gray and damp, a typical October morning. The bus hissed at the curb, waiting to take me away from the only home I'd ever really known. I clutched the box to my chest. It was heavier than it looked. It felt like it was full of stones. The bus ride into the city was a blur of smudged glass and indifferent faces. I ended up in a transient motel room that smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. The floral bedspread was thin and scratchy. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress and stared at the box. For hours, I just stared at it. Opening it felt like a final act, like admitting that this was all that was left. Finally, as dusk painted the grimy window purple and orange, I took a deep breath and sliced the tape with the small pocket knife I'd had since I was 14. The cardboard flaps sighed open. Inside, it was a jumble, a stack of faded photographs, mostly of people I didn't recognize, though one showed a tall, weathered man with kind eyes, holding the hand of a small boy with my own dark, unruly hair, my grandfather and me. There was a worn, leather-bound copy of Moby Dick, the pages soft as cloth, a tarnished silver compass that didn't point north, a collection of whittled wooden birds, each one small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, their details impossibly fine. And at the very bottom, beneath a folded wool sweater that still smelled faintly of wood smoke and earth, there was a large manila envelope. My name was written on the front in a strong, slanted hand, Leo. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a letter, it was a deed. A thick, creamy piece of paper folded into quarters with elaborate, old-fashioned script. The legal description was dense, a litany of markers and boundaries, but two things stood out: the name of the property owner, Arthur Vance, my grandfather, and the size, 800 hectares. My breath caught in my chest. 800 hectares, almost 2,000 acres. It was an impossible number, a kingdom. Tucked inside the folded deed was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was ornate with a circular head and a complex toothed bit. It looked like it belonged to a castle, a key to a kingdom that no longer existed. I held the deed in one hand and the key in the other. Proof. This was proof it had been real. Mrs. Gable said it was sold. My aunt had sold it, but my grandfather had left this for me. Why? Why leave a key to a door that now belonged to someone else? Why leave a map to a land that had been erased from my future? A cold fury, slow and deep, began to uncoil in my gut. It wasn't the wild, pointless anger of my teenage years. This was different. It was quiet and it was heavy. It was the anger of being lied to, of being erased. They had taken my story, sold it for cash, and left me with a cardboard box and a handful of money meant to keep me quiet and compliant. I looked at the check from the trust, $3,412. Then I looked at the deed, 800 hectares. There was a town name on the deed, a place I'd never heard of, Northwood. I pulled out my phone, my fingers clumsy on the screen. I searched for Northwood. It was small, remote, a 6-hour bus ride north. I looked up the bus schedule. There was a bus leaving at 5 a.m. A voice in my head, the voice of reason, the voice of St. Jude's, screamed at me. "What are you doing? It's gone. You're throwing away the only money you have to chase a ghost. Get a room, get a job, be careful." But another voice, a quieter one I hadn't heard in years, whispered back. It was the voice of the 6-year-old boy who remembered the smell of pine and the rumble of a kind man's voice. It asked a simple question. What if they were wrong? I sat there in that cheap motel room, the iron key cold in my palm, the deed spread out on the scratchy bedspread. I had no home. I had no family to speak of. I had a box of a dead man's things and a story that had been stolen from me. For the first time in my life, there was no one to tell me what to do. The fear of that was immense, but the freedom in it was a spark in the dark. I could be careful. I could find a tiny apartment, get a dead-end job, and spend the rest of my life wondering. Or I could buy a bus ticket. I could go and stand on the edge of my stolen kingdom and see for myself what had been lost. Maybe it was a stupid, reckless, hopeless thing to do, but it was mine. The choice was mine. By midnight, I had my answer. I packed the wooden birds, the book, the photographs, and the sweater back into the box. I slid the deed and the key into the inside pocket of my jacket, where I could feel their weight against my ribs. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the hours to pass. I was going north. I was going to find a ghost. The bus ride was a long, rattling journey into the unknown. I watched the sprawling city suburbs bleed into farmland, which then gave way to dense, rolling forests of pine and birch. The sky grew bigger, and the world grew quieter. With every mile that passed, a strange calm settled over me. I wasn't running away from St. Jude's anymore. I was running toward something. I didn't know what, but the motion itself felt like a kind of answer. I got off in Northwood just after 11 in the morning. The town was little more than a wide spot in the road. A main street with a handful of storefronts, most of them shuttered. A gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a post office, and a general store. A profound silence hung in the air, broken only by the wind whispering through the tall pines that crowded the edge of the town. This place wasn't just quiet, it was emptying out, a ship slowly taking on water. I went into the diner. It was warm inside and smelled of coffee and fried bacon. An older woman with a kind, tired face was wiping down the counter. She was the only one there, besides a couple of old men in flannel shirts nursing mugs of coffee at a corner table. "Help you?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Coffee, please," I said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "And maybe some information. I'm looking for the old Vance property." Her hands stilled. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. The old men in the corner stopped talking. The silence in the diner was suddenly heavy, watchful. "No one's lived out at the Vance place in years," she said slowly. "Not since old Arthur passed. Why are you looking for it?" "He was my grandfather." The tension in the room broke. The woman's face softened. "Arthur's grandson? Well, I'll be. You've got his eyes." She poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and pushed it toward me. "I'm Martha. Knew your grandfather my whole life. He was a good man, stubborn as a mule, but good." "I never really knew him," I admitted. "I was told the property was sold." Martha let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "Oh, it was sold, all right. Sold to a big development company from the city, Consolidated Holdings. They bought up half the county a decade back. Promised jobs, a resort. All they did was clear-cut 1,000 acres of old-growth forest, and then disappear when the money dried up. Left a scar on the land and a hole in this town." So it was true. My kingdom hadn't just been sold, it had been carved up and abandoned. The anger I'd felt in the motel room returned, colder and sharper now. "Is the old farmhouse still there?" I asked. "Far as I know," she said, topping up my coffee. "It's about 5 miles out of town, down Ridge Road. Can't miss it. Sits on a rise overlooking the valley. But son, there's nothing out there for you. The company put up fences, no trespassing signs everywhere." I paid for the coffee, thanked her, and left. The warning didn't deter me. It did the opposite. I wanted to see the fences. I wanted to see the signs telling me to stay off the land that should have been mine. The walk was long. The paved road quickly turned to gravel, and the forest pressed in on both sides, a wall of green and brown. The air was clean and sharp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. It was a smell I recognized, a ghost of a memory from that one year with my grandfather. After an hour of walking, the road crested a small hill, and I saw it. The farmhouse stood on a gentle slope, silhouetted against the vast, empty sky. It was a simple 2-story wooden house, its paint faded and peeling, its roof sagging in the middle like a tired old horse. A large, skeletal oak tree stood sentinel beside it, and beyond it, the land rolled away in every direction, a patchwork of overgrown fields, dense woods, and distant, hazy blue hills. It was bigger than I could have imagined. It was beautiful and broken and achingly empty. Martha was right. A rusty barbed wire fence ran along the road, punctuated every 100 feet by faded red signs that read, "Private property, consolidated holdings, no trespassing." But the gate across the dirt driveway wasn't locked. It was just held shut with a loop of heavy chain. I looked up and down the empty road. There was no one, just me and the wind and the quiet hum of the wilderness. I lifted the chain, the metal cold and heavy in my hands. The gate groaned open. I stepped through and pulled it shut behind me. I was trespassing on my own land. Walking up the overgrown driveway, I felt like an intruder in my own life. Weeds grew thick and tall through cracks in the dirt path. The silence was absolute. As I got closer to the house, I could see the decay more clearly. A broken window on the second floor stared out like a blind eye. The porch steps sagged, and one of the railings had collapsed. It was a place that had been left to die. I climbed the groaning porch steps, my boots kicking up clouds of dust. The front door was solid oak, its blue paint almost entirely stripped away by years of sun and snow. The keyhole was dark and intimidating. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It felt impossibly old in my hand. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. What was I hoping to find in here? Ghosts? Answers? A final definitive confirmation that everything was gone? I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a stiff, grinding screech, the lock turned. I pushed the door open. The air that rushed out was thick and musty, the smell of trapped time, of dust and decay and faint, lingering wood smoke. A long hallway stretched before me, vanishing into shadow. Sunlight streamed through a grimy window, illuminating a galaxy of dust motes dancing in the air. To my left was a living room, the furniture draped in white cloths, like sleeping giants. To my right, a staircase climbed into the darkness of the second floor. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The sound of it clicking shut was loud and final in the silence. I was in. I was standing in my grandfather's house. I ran a hand along the dusty wallpaper, tracing the faint outline of a faded floral pattern. I walked into the living room and pulled the sheet off a large armchair next to a stone fireplace. The fabric was worn, the imprint of the person who had sat there for years still faintly visible. I could almost see him, the tall man from the photograph, sitting here by the fire reading his copy of Moby Dick. I spent the rest of the day exploring. It was like walking through a museum of a life I'd never known. The kitchen, with its chipped enamel sink and a 1950s-era refrigerator, the upstairs bedrooms, each one cold and empty, the beds stripped bare. In what I guessed was my grandfather's room, a simple wooden desk stood beneath the broken window. The drawers were empty. Everything of value, everything personal, had been cleared out. By my aunt, I presumed. She'd sold the land, and she'd scraped the house clean of its memories, too. Despair began to set in again, heavier this time. I had come all this way for nothing. This was just an empty shell, a tomb. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows through the house, I slumped down onto the dusty floor of my grandfather's bedroom, my back against the wall. The trip had been a mistake. I'd wasted my money, my time, my last sliver of hope. I was just an orphan in a dead man's house, trespassing on corporate land. My hand was resting on the floorboards beside me, and my fingers idly traced the edge of one of the planks. It felt loose. I pushed at it. It shifted just a fraction of an inch. My curiosity piqued. I pried at it with my fingers. It was a short plank, maybe a foot long, and it wasn't nailed down like the others. I worked my pocket knife into the seam and lifted. The board came up with a soft groan. Beneath it was a small hollow space, and inside that space was another envelope, this one made of thick, yellowed parchment and sealed with a dark red wax seal. My name was on it, again, Leo. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside was a letter, several pages long, covered in that same strong, slanted handwriting. I took it over to the window, using the last of the fading daylight to read it. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then it means several things have happened. It means I am gone. It means you have come of age and left that place they sent you. And it means you were stubborn enough, or hopeful enough, to come back here, to this house. I am so proud of you for that, more than you can ever know." Tears pricked my eyes. I had to stop and take a deep, shuddering breath before I could continue reading. "I know what they have told you," the letter went on. "They told you this land was sold. They told you there is nothing left for you here. That is the story your Aunt Carol and her friends at Consolidated Holdings want you to believe. It is a lie. A convenient, legally complicated, but soul-crushing lie." My heart hammered against my ribs. A lie. "I am going to tell you the truth, Leo, but I cannot give it to you all at once. The truth is a heavy burden, and you must be strong enough to carry it. It is also a weapon, and you must be wise enough to wield it. This house, this land, is full of secrets. I have left you a map of a sort. This letter is the first step. The next is in the heart of the home. Where the fire burns, look for the stone that does not belong. I am sorry to make you work for your own story, my boy, but I had to protect it. I had to protect you. The people we are up against are powerful, and they believe they have already won. They are wrong. This land is your inheritance, not just the soil and the trees, but the fight for it too. That is the real legacy. Be brave. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I read the letter 3 times, my hands trembling. The last light of day faded, plunging the room into darkness, but I didn't care. A single fierce flame had been lit inside me. Hope. It wasn't the vague, childish hope of a fantasy kingdom anymore. This was something real, something sharp and dangerous and true. A lie. He'd left me a map, a fight. I wasn't trespassing anymore. I was home, and I was going to find the heart of it. I made my way back downstairs, my footsteps sure and steady in the dark. I found the stone fireplace in the living room. In the dim moonlight filtering through the dusty windows, I ran my hands over the cool, rough surface of the stones around the hearth. One of them near the bottom was slightly loose. It shifted under my fingers. I had found the next step. My grandfather's story was just beginning, and so was mine. Listen, I need to pause here for a second. If you've made it this far, you understand this feeling. The moment the world tells you one thing, but your gut, your soul, tells you another. It's a terrifying place to be. You're standing on a ledge between the story you've been given and the truth you have to fight for. Maybe for you, it wasn't a piece of land. Maybe it was about who you are, what you're capable of, or who your family really was. If this is hitting you, if you've ever had to dig for your own truth, I want you to know you're not alone. The story I'm telling you isn't just about 800 hectares. It's about reclaiming what's yours, even when the whole world says it's gone. This community we're building here is for people who get that. So stay with me. Let's get back to that fireplace, back to the stone that didn't belong. The stone was heavy, wedged tight with mortar and time. I worked at it with my pocket knife, chipping away at the crumbling gray sealant, my knuckles scraping against the rough rock. It took the better part of an hour, my muscles aching, my breath coming in short, dusty gasps. Finally, with a low, grinding sound, the stone came loose. I pulled it free and set it carefully on the hearth. Behind it was a dark, square cavity, just big enough to fit a small metal box. The box was an old cash box, rusted at the hinges. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid, and inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were two things: a thick stack of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon and a small leather-bound journal. I took the box over to the window and sat on the floor, using the faint light of the rising moon to see. I untied the ribbon. The letters were from my grandfather, all addressed to me, but they were different from the first one. These were dated, one for each year after he died. 10 letters in total. He had written to me from beyond the grave, a decade of guidance and love I had never received. I set them aside, my heart aching. Those were for later. I needed facts first. I needed to understand the lie. I opened the journal. The first page had a title: The Consolidated Journals. The entries began 11 years ago, just before he got sick. The story that unfolded, written in his strong, steady hand, was a nightmare. It started with the arrival of Consolidated Holdings. They came to Northwood like a slick, smiling plague, buying up family farms, timber rights, everything. They promised a ski resort, a golf course, hundreds of jobs. They offered cash, quick and easy, to people who were struggling. Many sold. My grandfather refused. This land, he wrote, had been in our family for 100 years. It wasn't just a commodity, it was a living thing, a legacy. He wouldn't sell. Then the pressure started. Their lawyers sent threatening letters about property lines and water rights. Their surveyors showed up unannounced. Someone cut his fences, letting his small herd of cattle wander onto the highway. The town, once supportive, began to turn on him. He was the old mule standing in the way of progress, the one man preventing their salvation. Then he got the diagnosis. The cancer was aggressive. The doctors gave him a year, maybe less. He knew he was running out of time. He knew that as soon as he was gone, they would descend on his estate, on his sister Carol, and on me, his 6-year-old heir. Carol, he wrote with a palpable sadness, was a good woman, but weak. Her husband had left her with a mountain of debt. She was easily swayed, terrified of confrontation. Consolidated knew this. They saw her as the weak link, so he made a plan. A desperate, complicated plan. He couldn't stop them from coming after the land, not with the legal firepower they had. But he could build a fortress of paper around it. He spent the last months of his life with a lawyer, a man named Elias Thorne, in a neighboring town. Together they restructured his will, created a complex trust, and set a series of legal traps. The key entry was dated just a week before he died. The sale will happen, he wrote. I've foreseen it. Carol will be coerced or convinced to sign the papers. Consolidated will believe they have won. They will file the deed, pay the taxes, and feel secure in their ownership. But the sale will be built on a foundation of sand. Elias has the documents to prove it. The trust I've established for Leo technically supersedes the executor's authority in a sale of this magnitude without the approval of a court-appointed guardian ad litem, which was never sought. It's a deliberate flaw, a poison pill, but the pill can only be activated by the beneficiary, by Leo, once he comes of age. The statute of limitations is 5 years from his 18th birthday. He has until he is 23 to challenge the sale. If he does not, the fraudulent title will solidify and the land will be lost forever. My hands were shaking as I read the words. A poison pill, a time bomb. He hadn't just accepted defeat. He had planned for it. He had armed me from a decade in the past. He had trusted me. He had trusted that I would be stubborn enough, that I would come here, that I would find this. The journal continued. He detailed how he'd hidden the money. He hadn't trusted the banks or Carol. He'd systematically withdrawn most of his savings in cash, small bills. He buried it. The journal contained a hand-drawn map of the property, marked with a series of X's. "This is your war chest, Leo," he wrote, "for the fight to come, for Elias Thorne's legal fees, for your life while you reclaim what is ours." I stared at the map, then out the dark window at the vast, unseen landscape, a war chest, a fight. This was so much bigger than I had imagined. My grandfather hadn't just left me land. He had left me a mission. The last entry was short, the handwriting a little shakier. "I'm tired now. I hope I've done enough. I hope I've given you a chance. Whatever you choose to do, Leo, know that your grandfather loved you. Know that you come from a long line of people who do not bend easily. The rest is up to you." I closed the journal. The house was no longer dark and eerie. It felt charged, alive with purpose. My purpose. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't an orphan adrift in the world. I was a son of this land and its steward. I had a map, a key, and a righteous fight ahead of me. The next morning I woke with the sun, stiff from sleeping on the floor but filled with a clarity I'd never known. I ate one of the protein bars I'd brought with me and studied the map. The first X was in the old barn, a massive, dilapidated structure about 100 yards from the house. The barn doors were swollen shut, and it took all my weight to force one of them open enough to slip through. The inside was cavernous, smelling of hay and dust and time. Light streamed in through missing slats in the walls, striping the dark interior. Pigeons scattered from the rafters with a rush of wings. Old, rusted farm equipment sat like sleeping iron beasts. The map indicated a spot beneath the old milking stalls, under a loose flagstone. I found the stalls, their wooden partitions covered in cobwebs. I cleared away the debris and started testing the stones on the floor. Just like in the house, one of them was loose. I pried it up with a rusted tire iron. Underneath was a large oilskin-wrapped package. It was heavy. I tore it open. Inside were stacks of cash bundled with twine, 50s and 20s. My hands trembled as I counted a small portion of it. There had to be tens of thousands of dollars here, maybe more. It was real. The war chest was real. I sat back on my heels in the dusty barn, the money in my lap, and I laughed. It was a strange, choked sound, half sob. It was the sound of a boy who had been given $3,000 and told to be careful, who now sat on a fortune buried in the dirt. My grandfather, the stubborn old mule, had thought of everything. I spent the next 2 days following the map. I found another package buried under the roots of the giant oak tree by the house. A third was hidden in a hollowed-out log deep in the woods that bordered the property. A fourth was tucked away in the old well house. By the time I was done, I had amassed a small mountain of cash. I didn't count it all, but I knew it was more money than I had ever dreamed of seeing in my life. It was enough. It was more than enough to fight. With the money secured, my next step was clear. I needed to find Elias Thorne, the lawyer. The journal said his office was in Silver Creek, the next town over, about an hour's drive away. I needed a vehicle. Walking back to Northwood, I found a bulletin board in the general store. Pinned to it was an ad for a 20-year-old pickup truck, beat up but running. The price was $2,000. I called the number. An old farmer named Hank answered. I walked out to his place, and he showed me the truck. It was rusted, dented, and the engine coughed like an old man, but it started. I paid him in cash with $20 bills from the barn. He gave me a strange look but handed over the keys and the title. For the first time in my life, I owned something that could move me forward. The drive to Silver Creek was nerve-wracking. I hadn't driven much, just a few lessons a volunteer at the home had given me. But the old truck rumbled along, and I felt a surge of independence, of power. I was no longer a passenger. I was in the driver's seat. Elias Thorne's law office was on the second floor of an old brick building on Silver Creek's main street. The sign on the door was faded. Elias Thorne, attorney at law. I walked in. The office was quiet, filled with the smell of old books and lemon polish. A woman who looked to be in her 70s sat at a reception desk. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Mr. Thorne. My name is Leo Vance." Her eyes widened slightly. She picked up the phone on her desk. "Mr. Thorne," she said softly, "Arthur Vance's grandson is here." She listened for a moment, then hung up. "He'll see you now. Go on in." Elias Thorne was an old man, probably in his 80s, with a shock of white hair and eyes as sharp and clear as a winter sky. He was tall and thin, dressed in a tweed jacket that was frayed at the elbows. He stood up from behind a desk piled high with books and papers as I entered. He didn't smile. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. "Leo Vance," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "I've been expecting you." "You have? Not you specifically, but someone with your name, for the last 10 years. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, son. I imagine you have questions." I sat. I pulled the journal and the deed from my bag and placed them on his desk. "My grandfather left these for me. He said you could help me." Thorne nodded slowly, looking at the journal but not opening it. Arthur was the most stubborn, principled, and brilliant man I ever knew. He was my friend. What he did to protect this land, to protect you, was a masterstroke of defensive law, a legal long game. He gambled everything on you. He said the sale was a lie. "Not a lie, precisely," Thorne corrected gently. "A facade. It is legally vulnerable, a house of cards waiting for the right hand to knock it over. And you, Mr. Vance, are that hand." He spent the next hour laying it all out for me, in clear, precise terms. He explained the trust, the deliberate legal flaw in the sale, the statute of limitations. He had a copy of every document stored in a fireproof safe. He had been the silent guardian of my inheritance, waiting for me to show up. "Consolidated Holdings knows none of this," he explained. "They have a deed that appears legitimate. They've been paying property taxes on it for a decade. In their minds, the land is theirs. When we file the claim, they will be blindsided." "So we can win?" I asked, a tremor of excitement in my voice. "Winning is not guaranteed," he said, his expression serious. "They have teams of lawyers in the city. They have billions of dollars. They will try to bury us in motions. They will try to bleed us dry. They will investigate you, try to discredit you. They will fight dirty. This will not be a clean or easy fight. It could take years. It will consume your life." His words were a cold dose of reality, but they didn't extinguish the fire in my gut. They stoked it. "I'm not afraid of a fight," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have nothing to lose." Thorne studied me for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then a small, thin smile touched his lips for the first time. "No," he said, "you have everything to gain. Arthur was right about you. You have his spine." He leaned back in his chair. So here is what happens next. I will draft the initial complaint to invalidate the sale. But before we file it, before we declare war, Consolidated will get wind of our preparations. It's unavoidable. And when they do, they will come to you. They will not come with lawyers, not at first. They will come with a checkbook. They will offer you a settlement. They will offer you an obscene amount of money to sign a piece of paper and walk away forever. Why would they do that if they think they own it? Because a lawsuit, even one they think they can win, is a nuisance. It's bad publicity. It's expensive. It's easier and cheaper for them to pay off the orphan grandson of the man they screwed over than to have this all dragged out in court. They will offer you a shortcut, a golden door out of this fight. They will offer you a new life, far away from here, and you will have to make a choice. The way he said it, I knew this was the real test. The fight wasn't just against the company. It was against the temptation to take the easy way out. The temptation to sell my own story, just like my aunt had. I won't take it, I said immediately. Thorne held up a hand. Don't be so quick to answer, son. Don't underestimate the weight of $1 million. Or 5, or 10. Think about what that kind of money could do for you. A new start anywhere in the world. No more fighting, no more past. You need to be sure in your soul what it is you're fighting for. Is it the money or is it the land? I left his office with my head spinning. He was right. It was easy to be brave in his office, filled with righteous anger. But what would I do when a man in an expensive suit offered me a check with enough zeros to erase every bad memory, every lonely night I'd ever had? I drove back to the farmhouse in my rumbling old truck. It was my home now. I spent the next week cleaning it. I swept out the dust of a decade. I scrubbed the floors. I fixed the broken window with a piece of plywood. I cleared the weeds from the porch. I was breathing life back into the place, and it was breathing life back into me. Each night I would read one of my grandfather's letters. They weren't about the legal battle. They were about him, about my grandmother who died before I was born, about my father, his son. He told me stories of the family, of the land, of the changing seasons. He taught me about the trees, the animals, the history written in the soil. He was giving me back the roots that had been stolen from me. In his letters, he was raising me. A week after my meeting with Thorne, it happened. A sleek, black sedan I didn't recognize rolled up my driveway. It looked alien and predatory against the backdrop of the old farmhouse. A man in a perfectly tailored gray suit got out. He was in his 40s with a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Leo Vance?" he asked, extending a hand. I didn't take it. "My name is Robert Jennings. I'm with Consolidated Holdings." "I know who you are," I said, staying on the porch, my arms crossed. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We heard you've been speaking with an attorney. There's really no need for any of that unpleasantness. We're prepared to be very generous." He opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a folder. He opened it and showed me the document inside. It was a settlement offer. My eyes scanned the numbers. My breath caught. He wasn't offering a few $100,000. He was offering $5 million. $5 million, Mr. Vance, he said, his voice smooth as silk. All you have to do is sign this document, relinquishing any and all future claims to this property. It's a formality, really. The money will be in your account within 24 hours. You could go anywhere, do anything, leave this place behind, buy a penthouse in the city, a yacht. You'd never have to worry about anything ever again. I looked from the paper to his face, then out at the land stretching away behind him, the fields, the forests, the hills. My kingdom. $5 million to sell it all away, to finish the job my aunt had started, to take the money and run. Everything in me, every instinct for survival honed over 12 years at St. Jude's, screamed at me to take it. It was a winning lottery ticket. It was an escape. It was safety, security, a life I couldn't even imagine. But then I thought of my grandfather's words in the journal. The fight for it, too. That is the real legacy. I thought of his letters, of the stories of this place. I thought of Martha in the diner and the old men in the corner, their town hollowed out by this man's company. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them. It was about the land itself. Elias Thorne had given me one last thing before I left his office. Another letter from my grandfather. Read this only when they make you the offer, he had said. I had it in my back pocket. I pulled it out now, the envelope worn and soft. I opened it in front of Robert Jennings, who watched me with a patient, predatory stillness. My dear Leo, the final letter read, if you are reading this, the wolf is at your door. He is not offering you food. He is offering you a golden collar. He is offering to buy your silence, to buy your story. The money will seem like a mountain. It will seem like the answer to every prayer you've ever had. But I ask you to consider this. What is an inheritance? Is it a pile of money, easily spent? Or is it a place to stand, a story to tell, a reason to fight? Is it the freedom to run away or the freedom to stay and build? I cannot make this choice for you. No one can, but know this. The money will be gone one day. The land will remain. Your signature on that paper is not just a legal act. It is a choice about who you are. Are you the boy who was abandoned, or are you the man who came home? Whatever you choose, I will love you, but I hope you choose home. I folded the letter and put it back in my pocket. My vision was blurry. I looked at Jennings, his slick smile, his expensive suit. He was the wolf, and this was my home. No, I said. My voice was quiet, but it echoed in the vast silence of the valley. Jennings's smile vanished. I'm sorry? The answer is no, I said, louder this time. This land is not for sale. Not for 5 million. Not for 50 million. It's not for sale. Now get off my property. For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty, of genuine shock in his eyes. He had come here expecting to buy a broken orphan. He had found something else entirely. He had found the man who came home. He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly packed his briefcase. He didn't say another word. He just got back in his black car, turned it around, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. I stood on the porch and watched until he was gone. The air felt clean again. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. There would be years of court battles, of motions and depositions. It would be hard, and it would be long. But for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and exactly where I belonged. I was standing on my own land, under my own sky. The next day, I called Elias Thorne. I turned them down, I said. I could hear the smile in his voice. Good, he said. Then let's get to work. Life settled into a new rhythm. I spent my days working on the farmhouse, making it habitable, and my nights studying the legal documents Thorne sent me. I used some of the money to buy tools and supplies from the general store in Northwood. I started talking to people. I told Martha at the diner what was happening. The story spread. The old men who had been watching me with suspicion now nodded to me in the street. Some of them had also been pushed out by Consolidated, taking lowball offers they later regretted. My fight was becoming their fight. They would show up at the farmhouse on weekends, one with a new set of spark plugs for the truck, another with a casserole from his wife, another just to sit on the porch and share stories about my grandfather. I was no longer just reclaiming land. I was becoming part of a community. I found my grandfather's old workshop in the barn and the collection of half-finished wooden birds. I picked up his tools, the wood smooth and worn from his hands, and I started carving. I wasn't very good at first, but it felt right. It connected me to him, to the quiet, patient work of creating something beautiful out of a simple block of wood. My inheritance, I realized, wasn't the 800 hectares. It wasn't the money buried in the ground. It was the choice to fight for something that mattered more than money. The choice to honor a legacy of stubborn, principled love for a piece of the earth. The scars of my childhood, the 12 years of feeling like a ghost in my own life, were still there. They would always be a part of me. But they weren't the whole story anymore. They were just the preface. The real story was the one I was building now with my own 2 hands on the foundation my grandfather had left for me. This story doesn't have a neat and tidy ending because it's not over. The legal battle is still ongoing, but I'm not scared. I have a home, I have a purpose, I have a community, I have my grandfather's stubborn spine, and I have a story to tell, and that brings me back to you. What is the inheritance you're fighting for? It might not be land. It might be your dignity, your truth, your art, your family's history. It's the thing the world wants you to sell cheap, to trade for an easy life. Don't sell it. Whatever you do, don't sell it. It's worth more than any wolf can ever offer you. Dig for it, fight for it, build your home there. Thank you for listening to my story. If it meant something to you, if you see yourself in this fight, then I hope you'll join this community. Subscribe and tell me in the comments what your inheritance is, the one you're fighting to protect. Because every one of those stories matters, and every one of them deserves to be told.